The Pelican Girls by Sylvester Sko Fourroux. The Mississippi River Delta stretched endlessly before Pierre Le Moyne d'Iberville as his ship navigated the treacherous waters in the winter of year 1702. Beside him stood his younger brother, Jean-Baptiste Le Moyne de Bienville, barely 22 years old but already hardened by years in the New World. Together, they had been tasked by King Louis XIV with establishing France's foothold in Louisiana, a vast territory that existed more in royal imagination than in mapped reality. "There," Bienville said, pointing toward a bluff rising above the Mobile River's western bank, 27 miles from the bay, high enough to avoid the worst floods, close enough to the Gulf for supply ships. Together, they had been tasked by King Louis XIV with establishing France's foothold in Louisiana, a vast territory that existed more in royal imagination than in mapped reality. The site they chose, 27-Mile Bluff, seemed promising in that cold February. Ancient oaks draped with Spanish moss created a cathedral-like canopy over ground that rose a modest 15 feet above the river's winter level. The Mobilian Indians who lived nearby had warned them about the summer floods, but the French were determined. This would be Fort Louis de la Louisiane, the first capital of French Louisiana, the jewel that would anchor France's claim to the entire Mississippi Valley. By March, the sound of axes rang through the forest. Soldiers, voyageurs, carpenters, and blacksmiths worked from dawn until dusk, felling cypress and pine, dragging logs through mud that sucked at their boots. The fort took shape slowly, a crude palisade of sharpened logs driven into the earth, bastions at each corner mounting small cannon that had been hauled upriver with enormous effort. Inside the fort's protective walls, structures began to rise. To call them buildings was generous. They were shacks, really rough-hewn logs chinked with mud and moss, roofs of bark and thatch that leaked with every rain. Deer hides covered window openings, flapping in the breeze. Dirt floors turned to mud when water seeped through the walls. The commandant's house was only marginally better, with actual shutters and a stone chimney that smoked abominably. By summer's end, perhaps 50 structures stood within and around the fort. The population swelled to nearly 200 sole soldiers of the marine companies in their blue coats with white facings, voyageurs in their buckskin and bright sashes, a handful of craftsmen, a surgeon named Doctor. Alexandre, who had studied in Paris and now found himself treating arrow wounds and swamp fever in the wilderness. The heat was murderous. Men unused to the subtropical climate wilted in their wool uniforms. Mosquitoes rose in clouds from the surrounding swamps, their whining drone a constant torment. The river, so placid in winter, began to rise. By July, water lapped at the base of the bluff. By August, it had climbed halfway up. "The savages were right," muttered Sergeant Rousseau, watching the brown water creep closer. "This place floods." But they had committed. Supplies arrived sporadically from France, via Havana or Pensacola. Barrels of flour often spoiled. Salt, pork, rancid, wine turned to vinegar. The colonists learned to supplement their rations with what the land provided. Corn from the Mobilian Indians, who proved friendly and curious about these pale strangers. Fish from the river, catfish as large as a man's leg, bass, gar with their prehistoric armor. Deer and turkey from the forests. Bear meat, rich and greasy. In winter, ducks and geese darkened the sky in their migrations. The Mobilians taught them which plants were edible, which could cure, and which could kill. They showed the French how to make sagamité, a corn porridge that became a staple. They traded deerskins for French goods, knives, hatchets, glass beads, and the brass kettles that the Indians prized above all else. But not all the native peoples were friendly. The Alabama Indians to the north viewed the French presence with suspicion and hostility. Raids began in the fall of 1702. A carpenter named Dubois was killed while cutting timber a mile from the fort, his scalped body found 3 days later. 2 soldiers on patrol vanished. Sentries reported seeing figures moving through the forest at night, there and gone like smoke. Bienville, now commandant after his brother returned to France, ordered that no one venture beyond musket range of the fort without an armed escort. Work parties went out with soldiers flanking them, weapons primed and ready. The settlement became a prison of sorts, its inhabitants trapped between the rising river and the hostile wilderness. Yet life continued. On a cold February evening in 1703, exactly 1 year after the fort's founding, Bienville gathered the colonists for a celebration. They had survived a year in this harsh land. That deserved recognition. "Mes amis," he announced, standing before a bonfire in the fort's central square. "In France, this is the season of Mardi Gras Fat Tuesday, when we feast before the Lenten fast. We may be far from Paris, but we are still Frenchmen. Tonight, we celebrate." It was a modest affair by French standards. No elaborate costumes, no grand balls. But there was music, a fiddle and a drum, and dancing. The men worked together, laughing as they spun through the mud. Someone had hoarded a small cask of brandy, and it was shared around. For a few hours, they forgot the mosquitoes, the floods, the fear of Indian attacks. They were French, and they would bring civilization to this wilderness, one celebration at a time. None of them knew they had just held the first Mardi Gras celebration in North America, a tradition that would outlast empires. Part 2. The Pelican's Cargo. The year 1704. Etienne Beaumont stood at the rail of the Pelican as the ship navigated the treacherous passage into Mobile Bay in July 1704. At 26, he was young for a ship's navigator, but his skill with charts and instruments had earned him the position. More importantly, he could read and write rare abilities that made him valuable for maintaining the ship's logs and manifests. He was not a large man. Slender, of medium height, with dark hair he kept tied back in a queue, and gray eyes that seemed always to be calculating distances and angles. His hands were ink-stained, his fingers more accustomed to holding a quill than a sword. The sailors called him the Scholar, with a mixture of respect and gentle mockery. The Pelican had sailed from La Rochelle 4 months earlier, stopped in Havana for water and supplies, and now approached Mobile with a cargo that had the entire colony buzzing with anticipation. Word had spread from the pilot boat. The ship carried women, 23 of them, to be precise. Young women, ages 14 to 19, orphans and convent girls selected by the authorities in France and sent to the colony to become wives for the settlers. Each carried a small chest, a cassette containing a modest trousseau, 2 dresses, undergarments, a cloak, needles and thread, a prayer book. They would become known as the Casquette Girls, or, more commonly, the Pelican Girls. Etienne had spent the voyage trying not to stare at them. They were kept in a separate section of the ship, chaperoned by 2 stern nuns who guarded them like dragons guarding treasure. But he had seen them during their brief periods on deck, taking air under the watchful eyes of Sister Marie Thérèse. One in particular had caught his attention. Marie Claire Dubois, 17 years old, with auburn hair that caught the sunlight like copper and green eyes that seemed to hold both sadness and determination. She was not the prettiest of the girls that honor belonged to Geneviève, a blonde beauty who knew her worth, but there was something about Marie Claire that drew his gaze. An intelligence in her eyes, a quiet strength in the way she carried herself. She had noticed him watching. Once, their eyes had met across the deck, and she had smiled a small, tentative smile that made his heart race. He had nodded respectfully and turned away, knowing that a ship's navigator had no business entertaining thoughts about a girl destined to marry a colonist. But he thought about her anyway. During his night watches, calculating their position by the stars, he would remember that smile. During the day, bent over his charts, he would find his mind wandering to the sound of her laugh when she spoke with the other girls. The Pelican anchored in the bay, unable to navigate the shallow river to the fort. Pirogues' dugout canoes came out to ferry passengers and cargo upriver. Etienne watched as the girls were helped into the boats, their cassettes loaded carefully. Marie Claire looked back at the ship once, and he thought perhaps imagined that she was looking for him. Dreaming again, scholar? The voice belonged to Jacques Moreau, the ship's boatswain, a bear of a man with shoulders like an ox and fists that had broken more than one sailor's jaw. He was 30 years old, a veteran of a dozen voyages, and he ruled the crew through a combination of competence and intimidation. Just ensuring the cargo is properly transferred, Etienne replied evenly. Jacques laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. Cargo? Is that what we're calling them? I saw you watching that red-haired one. The quiet girl. Marie Claire, I think they called her. I was merely... Save it, scholar. I've got my eye on her, too. Pretty little thing. Quiet, obedient. She'll make a good wife. Jacques grinned, showing teeth stained by tobacco. I'm thinking of staying in Mobile this time. Take a wife. Settle down. Build something. Etienne felt something cold settle in his stomach. You're a sailor. What do you know about settling? I know how to work, how to build, how to fight. Jacques flexed his massive hands. That's what this place needs. Strong men, not scribblers who get ink on their fingers. He clapped Etienne on the shoulder, a blow that nearly knocked him off balance, and strode away, laughing. Etienne gripped the rail, watching the pirogues disappear upriver. He had no claim on Marie Claire, no right to feel this surge of jealousy and anger, but he felt it nonetheless. The Pelican would remain in Mobile for 2 weeks, unloading cargo and taking on a load of deer skins and timber for the return voyage to France. 2 weeks. Perhaps, in that time, he might find a way to speak with her, to learn if that smile had meant anything at all. Part 3. Death comes to Fort Louis. The Pelican brought more than brides to Mobile. In its hold, in the water barrels filled in Havana, in the very air that had circulated through the ship during its stop in that fever-ridden port, came death. The first cases appeared 3 days after the ship's arrival. A soldier named Petit complained of a headache and fever. By evening, his skin had taken on a yellowish cast. By morning, he was vomiting black blood. By noon, he was dead. Doctor. Alexandra recognized the symptoms immediately. Yellow fever, he said grimly, standing over Petit's body. The black vomit. I saw it in Saint-Domingue. God help us all. The disease spread like wildfire through the crowded fort. The crude shacks, packed close together, became incubators for contagion. Men who had survived Indian raids and floods fell to an enemy they could not see or fight. The fever came suddenly chills, headache, pain in the back and limbs, then the yellowing of the skin and eyes, then the terrible vomiting of dark, digested blood that gave the disease its French name, vomito negro. Some recovered after a few days of misery. Others progressed to the final stage delirium, convulsions, death. There was no pattern to it, no way to predict who would live and who would die. Strong men succumbed, while weaker ones survived. Youth was no protection. Neither was piety. The Pelican girls, housed together in a long barracks near the commandant's house, were kept in strict quarantine. Sister Marie-Thérèse allowed no visitors, no contact with the outside world. Food was left at the door. Water was boiled before drinking, on Dr. Alexandra's orders, though no one understood why this might help. Inside the barracks, the girls huddled together, praying and weeping. Through the deer-hide windows, they could hear the sounds of the dying, the groans, the prayers, the wailing of widows. They could smell the smoke from the fires where contaminated bedding was burned. They could see the burial parties carrying wrapped bodies to the cemetery outside the fort walls. Marie Claire tried to keep the younger girls calm. At 17, she was not the oldest that was Geneviève. At 19, but she had a steadiness that the others lacked. She had grown up in the orphanage of the Salpêtrière in Paris, where death was a frequent visitor. She had learned not to panic, not to give in to despair. We must trust in God's mercy, she told them, though her own faith felt fragile as glass. We have survived the ocean voyage. We will survive this. But why did God bring us here? sobbed Marguerite, a 14-year-old who looked even younger. Why bring us all this way just to die? Marie Claire had no answer for that. She held the girl, stroking her hair, and wondered the same thing herself. She had volunteered for this journey, seeing it as an escape from the orphanage, a chance for a new life. Now that new life seemed likely to be very short indeed. Through the window, she could see men moving through the fort burial parties, soldiers on guard duty, Dr. Alexandra hurrying from one patient to another with his black bag. And once, she saw the navigator from the Pelican, the slender young man with the gray eyes who had watched her during the voyage. He was helping to carry water barrels, his scholar's hands blistered from unaccustomed labor. She wondered what his name was. She wondered if he would survive. The epidemic claimed its most famous victim on August 6th. Henri de Tonty, the legendary explorer who had accompanied La Salle down the Mississippi, who had survived countless battles and hardships, who wore an iron hand to replace the one he had lost to a grenade in Sicily. Henri de Tonty died of yellow fever in a crude shack in Fort Louis de la Louisiana. He was 54 years old. His death sent a wave of despair through the colony. If Tonty could fall, anyone could. Men began to desert, slipping away into the forest, preferring to take their chances with the Indians rather than wait for the fever to claim them. Bienville, himself weakened by a mild case of the fever, struggled to maintain order. He posted guards to prevent desertion. He ordered the fort cleaned, all refuse burned, and the streets swept. He didn't know if it would help, but he had to do something. By the end of August, the epidemic had burned itself out, as such epidemics do. The death toll was staggering. 47 colonists dead, nearly a quarter of the population. The Pelican's crew had suffered 8 sailors dead, including the captain. The ship sat at anchor in the bay, undermanned and unable to sail. Miraculously, none of the Pelican girls had fallen ill. Sister Marie Therese's strict quarantine had saved them. When they finally emerged from their barracks in early September, blinking in the sunlight like prisoners released from a dungeon, they found a colony transformed by grief. And they found that they were now the most valuable commodity in Fort Louis de la Louisiana. 23 young women, healthy and marriageable, in a colony where men outnumbered women 10 to 1. The competition for their hands would be fierce. Part 4. The Courtship. Etienne had survived the fever, though it had left him weak and hollow-eyed. He had spent 2 weeks in delirium, tended by Dr. Alexandra and a Mobilian woman named Singing Bird who knew the healing properties of local herbs. He remembered little of that time, fragments of nightmares, the taste of bitter medicine, the cool touch of a wet cloth on his burning forehead. When he finally recovered enough to walk, he found that the Pelican was still in Mobile, unable to sail with so many of its crew dead. The ship's new captain, the first mate, promoted by necessity, had asked Etienne to stay on as navigator for the return voyage to France, but that voyage would not happen until the ship could recruit or impress enough sailors to man it. That might take months in Mobile. The thought filled Etienne with a mixture of dread and hope. Dread at the prospect of spending more time in this fever-ridden wilderness. Hope that he might have a chance to speak with Marie Claire. The opportunity came sooner than he expected. Bienville, recognizing that the colony needed to restore morale, announced a celebration to mark the end of the epidemic. A feast, with music and dancing. And the Pelican girls would attend, properly chaperoned, so that the colonists might begin the process of courtship. "It's not a market," Sister Marie-Thérèse insisted, her stern face brooking no argument. "These are respectable young women, not cattle to be auctioned. Any man who wishes to court one of my charges must demonstrate that he can provide for a wife. He must have a trade, a dwelling, and the approval of Commandant Bienville. And the young woman herself must consent. I will not see them forced into marriages against their will." The feast was held on a warm September evening in the fort's central square. Tables had been constructed from rough planks, and the colonists contributed what they could to the meal. There was sagamité, of course, and roasted venison, and fish from the river. Someone had hoarded a small amount of flour and baked bread, real bread, not the corn cakes they usually ate. There was even wine, though it was sour and had to be mixed with honey to be palatable. The Pelican girls sat together at one table, dressed in their best clothes, which meant the least worn of their two dresses. Marie Claire wore a simple gown of dark blue wool, too heavy for the climate, but all she had. Her auburn hair was pinned up under a white cap, as was proper for an unmarried woman. She kept her eyes downcast, as Sister Marie-Thérèse had instructed, but she was acutely aware of the men watching them. So many men. Soldiers in their blue coats, trying to look presentable despite the patches and stains. Voyageurs in their buckskin, their faces weathered and scarred. Carpenters and blacksmiths with their work-hardened hands. All of them stared at the women with a hunger that had nothing to do with the food on the tables. Etienne sat with the Pelican's remaining crew, picking at his food. He had no appetite, the fever had left him that way, but he forced himself to eat. He needed to regain his strength, and he needed to find the courage to approach Marie Claire. Jacques Moreau had no such hesitation. The big bosun rose from his seat, straightened his coat, and walked directly to the women's table. He bowed a surprisingly graceful gesture for such a large man and addressed Sister Marie-Thérèse. "Sister, I would like permission to speak with Mademoiselle Marie-Claire Dubois." Sister Marie-Thérèse's eyes narrowed. "For what purpose?" "For the purpose of courtship, sister. I am a skilled sailor and a strong worker. I intend to remain in Mobile and establish myself here. I can provide for a wife." The nun looked at Marie Claire. "Do you wish to speak with this man?" Marie Claire's heart sank. She had noticed Jacques during the voyage. It was impossible not to notice him. He was loud, crude, and frightening. She had seen him strike a sailor for some minor infraction, had heard his coarse laughter and rougher language. The thought of being married to such a man made her stomach turn. But what choice did she have? She was an orphan with no family, no dowry, no prospects. She had been sent to Mobile to marry a colonist. Jacques was a colonist. He was strong and capable. He could protect her, provide for her. Many women had married men they did not love and made lives for themselves. I suppose so, sister," she said quietly. Jacques grinned triumphantly and sat down beside her, his bulk making the bench creak. "You're a pretty little thing," he said, his voice pitched low so only she could hear. "Quiet. I like that in a woman. Too many women talk too much and think their opinions matter. But you know your place, don't you?" Marie Claire said nothing, her hands folded in her lap. She could smell him sweat and tobacco and rum. His hand, resting on the table, was twice the size of hers, the knuckles scarred from fighting. "I'll build us a good house," Jacques continued. "Better than these shacks. I know how to work, and I'll keep you safe. Any man who looks at you wrong, I'll break his face. You'll be mine, and everyone will know it." The possessiveness in his voice made her shiver. She glanced up, looking for escape, and her eyes met Etienne's across the square. He was watching her, his expression troubled. For a moment, their gazes held. Then he looked away, and she felt a strange sense of loss. The evening continued. Musicians played a fiddle and a drum, the same instruments that had marked the first Mardi Gras. Men danced with each other, as there were not enough women to go around. A few of the bolder colonists approached Sister Marie-Thérèse, asking permission to court one of her charges. Some were accepted, others dismissed. Jacques remained beside Marie Claire, talking about his plans, his strength, his prowess. She nodded when it seemed appropriate, said yes, and I see at intervals, and felt her spirit sinking lower with each passing minute. Then Etienne appeared before them. He looked thin and pale, still recovering from the fever, but he stood straight and met Jacques' eyes without flinching. "Pardon me," he said politely. "I wonder if I might have a word with Mademoiselle Dubois." Jacques' face darkened. "She's spoken for, scholar. Find your own woman." "I don't believe any formal arrangement has been made," Etienne replied, his voice steady. "And Sister Marie-Thérèse said that the young women have the right to speak with whom they choose." Is that so? Jacques rose to his feet, towering over Etienne. And what do you have to offer a woman? You're a sailor, same as me. But you're weak, sickly. You can barely hold a pen, much less an axe or a musket. What kind of husband would you make? Perhaps Mademoiselle Dubois should be the judge of that. The two men stared at each other. The conversation around them had stopped. Everyone was watching now, sensing confrontation. Sister Marie-Thérèse intervened. Gentlemen, this is neither the time nor the place for such a discussion. Monsieur Moreau, you have had your opportunity to speak with Mademoiselle Dubois. Monsieur? Beaumont, sister. Etienne Beaumont, navigator of the Pelican. Monsieur Beaumont, you may speak with Mademoiselle Dubois, if she consents. Mademoiselle? Marie-Claire looked up at Etienne, at his gray eyes and ink-stained fingers, at the way he stood his ground despite being outmatched in size and strength. She thought of Jacques' possessive words, his assumption that she would be his property, and she made her choice. Yes, sister. I want to speak with Monsieur Beaumont. Jacques' face turned red. You little... He caught himself, aware of Sister Marie-Thérèse's glare. Fine. Talk to the scholar. But when you're ready for a real man, you know where to find me. He stalked away, his hands clenched into fists. Etienne sat down where Jacques had been, careful to maintain a respectful distance. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Marie-Claire said, Thank you. For what? For giving me a reason to send him away. He frightens me. He frightens most people. He's a violent man. Etienne paused. I should tell you, I have very little to offer. I'm a navigator, not a settler. I'll be returning to France when the Pelican sails. I have no house, no land, no prospects here. I wanted to speak with you, to know your name, to hear your voice. Marie-Claire felt something warm bloom in her chest. My name is Marie-Claire Dubois. I'm 17 years old. I grew up in the Salpêtrière in Paris. I can read and write, which is unusual for an orphan, but one of the sisters taught me. I volunteered to come to Louisiana because I wanted to see something beyond the orphanage walls. I wanted a life of my own choosing. And now you're here, in this wilderness, expected to marry a stranger. Yes. She looked around at the crude fort, the rough men, the endless forest beyond the walls. It's not what I imagined. But then nothing ever is it? They talked for an hour, their conversation ranging from the trivial to the profound. Etienne told her about his childhood in Normandy, his apprenticeship to a ship's navigator, and his love of mathematics and astronomy. Marie-Claire told him about the orphanage, about the sisters who had raised her, about her dreams of a different life. I wanted to be a teacher, she confessed, to teach other girls to read and write. But orphans don't become teachers. We become servants or wives. Those are our choices. Perhaps here, in this new land, there could be other choices, Etienne suggested. Perhaps here, you could teach. Perhaps. But she didn't sound convinced. When Sister Marie-Thérèse announced that it was time for the young women to retire, Marie-Claire rose reluctantly. Will I see you again? She asked. If you wish it. I do. Etienne watched her walk away, surrounded by the other Pelican girls, and felt something he had never felt before. Not just attraction, though he was undoubtedly attracted to her. Not just admiration, though he admired her intelligence and spirit. It was something deeper, more fundamental. A sense that he had found someone who understood him, who saw the world as he did. He was so lost in thought that he didn't notice Jacques approaching until the big man was right beside him. You think you're clever, don't you, scholar? Jacques' voice was low and dangerous. You think you can steal what's mine with your pretty words and your educated airs? But you're wrong. She'll be mine. And if you get in my way again, I'll break you. She's not yours, Etienne replied, his heart pounding. She's not anyone's. She has the right to choose. Choose? Jacques laughed. She's an orphan, a nobody. She'll choose whoever can provide for her, and that's not you. You're weak. You're nothing, perhaps, but I'm not a brute who threatens violence when he doesn't get his way. It was the wrong thing to say. Jacques' fist came out of nowhere, catching Etienne in the stomach. He doubled over, gasping, and Jacques grabbed him by the collar and lifted him off his feet. Listen to me, scholar. Stay away from her. This is your only warning. He threw Etienne to the ground and walked away, leaving him lying in the dirt, struggling to breathe. Part V. The Challenge. The courtship of the Pelican girls became the colony's primary entertainment over the following weeks. With Sister Marie-Thérèse's strict supervision, men were allowed to call on the young women in the barracks, always with a chaperone present. They brought gifts, wildflowers, carved trinkets, fresh game. They made promises of houses to be built, land to be cleared, and futures to be secured. Some of the girls were quickly spoken for. Geneviève, the beautiful blonde, accepted the suit of Lieutenant Marchand, a young officer from a good family. Marguerite, the youngest, was courted by a gentle carpenter named Dubois, who promised to treat her like a daughter until she was old enough to be a wife. Others took their time, weighing their options, trying to discern which of their suitors would make the best husband. Marie-Claire received many callers. Her quiet demeanor and obvious intelligence made her attractive to men who wanted more than just a pretty face. But she politely turned them all away, saying she needed more time to decide. The truth was, she was waiting for Etienne. He came to see her every few days, always bringing something small, a book he had borrowed from Bienville's meager library, a sketch he had made of the fort, a shell he had found on the beach. They would sit in the barracks common room, with Sister Marie-Thérèse knitting in the corner, and talk for hours. He told her about the stars, how sailors used them to navigate across trackless oceans. He explained the mathematics of celestial navigation, drawing diagrams with a stick of charcoal on a piece of bark. She was fascinated, asking questions that showed she understood the concepts. She told him about the books she had read in the orphanage, the lives of saints, mostly, but also some poetry and philosophy that one of the sisters had smuggled in. They discovered a shared love of Molière's plays, and spent one afternoon reciting lines they remembered, laughing at their imperfect memories. "You should have been a scholar," Marie-Claire said. "You have the mind for it. My family couldn't afford university. Navigation was the closest I could come to studying the sciences." He paused. "And you should have been a teacher. You have the gift for it. Perhaps in another life. Perhaps in this one. Mobile needs a school. Someone should teach the children who will be born here. And who would pay a woman to teach? The colony would, or the church, or the parents themselves. This is a new world, Marie-Claire. The old rules don't have to apply." She wanted to believe him, but she was practical enough to know that new worlds were usually built on old prejudices. Jacques watched their courtship with growing anger. He had tried to court Marie-Claire himself, but she had refused to see him after that first evening. Sister Marie-Thérèse, sensing the girl's fear, had supported her decision. Jacques was not a suitable husband for any of her charges, the nun had decided. He was too rough, too violent, too likely to make a woman's life miserable. But Jacques was not a man who accepted rejection gracefully. He drank more, fought more, and brooded on the injustice of it all. He had been a sailor for 15 years, having survived storms, battles, and shipwrecks. He had decided to settle down, to take a wife, to build a life. And this slip of a girl, this nobody from an orphanage, had rejected him in favor of a weak scholar who couldn't even throw a punch. It was intolerable. The confrontation came in mid-October, on a cool morning when the first hints of autumn touched the air. Etienne was walking from the Pelican's anchorage to the fort, carrying a letter he had written for one of the sailors. He had become the unofficial scribe for the colony, writing letters for men who couldn't write themselves, reading letters that arrived from France. Jacques stepped out of the forest, blocking the path. He was drunk, not falling down drunk, but drunk enough that his inhibitions were gone and his anger was unleashed. "Scholar," he said, the word dripping with contempt. "We need to talk. I have nothing to say to you, Moreau, but I have something to say to you. You've been sniffing around Marie Claire like a dog after a bitchin' heat. It stops now. Etienne felt his face flush. Don't speak of her that way. I'll speak of her however I want. She's going to be my wife. She's made it clear she doesn't want you. She doesn't know what she wants. She's a child, but I'll teach her. Jacques grinned, an ugly expression. I'll teach her all sorts of things. Etienne's hand clenched into a fist. He had never been a violent man. He had avoided fights all his life, preferring words to blows. But the implication in Jacques' words, the threat to Marie Claire, ignited something in him. You'll never touch her, he said quietly. Oh? And who's going to stop me, you? Jacques laughed. You couldn't stop a child, scholar. You're weak, pathetic. You're not fit to lick my boots, much less compete with me for a woman. Then prove it, Etienne heard himself say. If you're so much better than me, prove it. A duel. Tomorrow at dawn. The winner gets to court Marie Claire without interference from the loser. Jacques' eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in calculation. A duel? You're challenging me to a duel? I am. What weapons? Swords? Pistols? Fists, Etienne said. Just fists. First man who can't continue loses. Jacques threw back his head and laughed. You're insane, scholar. I'll kill you. Perhaps. But at least I'll have tried. Fine. Tomorrow at dawn, behind the fort, where the ground is clear. And when I'm done with you, when you're lying in the dirt bleeding, I'm going to go to Marie Claire and tell her what a fool you were. And then I'm going to make her my wife. And there won't be a damn thing you can do about it. He walked away, still laughing. Etienne stood alone on the path, his heart pounding, and wondered what madness had possessed him. He had never been in a real fight in his life. Jacques was twice his size, a veteran brawler who had broken men's bones for sport. The duel would be a massacre. But he had made the challenge. He couldn't back down now. Not if he wanted to live with himself. Not if he wanted to protect Marie Claire from a man who saw her as property to be claimed. He spent the rest of the day preparing. He borrowed a book on boxing from Dr. Alexandre, who looked at him with concern but didn't ask questions. He practiced throwing punches at a tree, ignoring the pain in his knuckles. He tried to remember everything he had ever heard about fighting. Keep your guard up. Protect your face. Aim for the soft spots. It wasn't enough. He knew it wasn't enough. But it was all he had. That evening, he went to see Marie Claire one last time. Sister Marie-Thérèse let him in, her expression troubled. She had heard about the duel news traveled fast in the small colony, and she disapproved. Violence is never the answer, Monsieur Beaumont, she said sternly. I know, sister, but sometimes it's the only answer available. Marie Claire was waiting in the common room, her face pale. Is it true? You challenged Jacques Moreau to a fight? I did. Why? Etienne, he'll hurt you. He might kill you. I couldn't let him keep threatening you, keep talking about you as if you were a thing to be owned. So you're going to let him beat you senseless instead? How does that help me? I don't know, Etienne admitted. I only know I had to do something. I couldn't just stand by and let him. He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Marie Claire stood and crossed to him. She took his hands in hers the first time they had touched. Her hands were small and warm, calloused from work but gentle. Don't do this, she said softly. Please, I'm not worth dying for. You're worth everything, he replied. You're intelligent, kind, brave. You deserve better than a brute like Jacques. You deserve a choice, a real choice. And if you die tomorrow, what choice will I have? Jacques will claim he won me fairly. Sister Marie-Thérèse won't be able to refuse him. Then I won't die. I'll find a way to survive. How? You're not a fighter, Etienne. You're a scholar, a navigator, a man who works with his mind, not his fists. Then I'll have to learn quickly. She looked at him for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face. Then she leaned forward and kissed him. A brief, soft kiss that lasted only a second but seemed to contain entire worlds. "Come back to me," she whispered. "Whatever happens tomorrow, come back to me." "I will," he promised, knowing it was a promise he might not be able to keep. Part Vis. The duel. Dawn came cold and gray, with mist rising from the river. Etienne stood behind the fort in a clearing that had been made by cutting down trees for lumber. His hands were wrapped in strips of cloth, his shirt removed despite the chill. Dr. Alexandra stood beside him, having agreed to serve as his second. "It's not too late to call this off," the doctor said quietly. "No one would think less of you. Jacques would. And more importantly, I would think less of myself." A crowd had gathered, soldiers, voyageurs, craftsmen. Word of the duel had spread through the colony, and everyone wanted to see the scholar fight the bosun. Bets were being placed, though the odds were heavily in Jacques' favor. Jacques arrived with his second, a voyageur named Leblanc. The big man was grinning, confident. He had stripped to the waist, revealing a torso covered in scars, knife wounds, musket balls, the marks of a violent life. His muscles were like iron, his fists like hammers. Bienville himself came to oversee the duel, accompanied by Lieutenant Marchand. The commandant looked displeased. "Gentlemen, I don't approve of this," he said. "We have too few men in this colony to waste them on foolish duels over women. However, since the challenge has been made and accepted, I will allow it to proceed. The rules are simple. No weapons, no biting, no eye gouging. The fight continues until one man yields or is unable to continue. Is this understood?" Both men nodded. "Then begin." Jacques didn't wait. He charged forward like a bull, his fist swinging in a wide arc aimed at Etienne's head. Etienne ducked barely and felt the wind of the blow pass over him. He tried to counter with a punch to Jacques' ribs, but it was like hitting a tree. Jacques didn't even flinch. The big man's backhand caught Etienne across the face, spinning him around. He tasted blood, felt his lips split. Another punch to the stomach drove the air from his lungs. He fell to his knees, gasping. "Get up, scholar," Jacques taunted. "We're just getting started." Etienne forced himself to stand. His vision was blurred, his head ringing. He raised his fists, trying to remember what he had read about boxing. Protect your face. Keep moving. Look for openings. Jacques came at him again, and this time Etienne managed to dodge to the side. He threw a punch that actually connected with Jacques' jaw. It was like punching stone, and pain shot through his hand, but Jacques' head snapped back slightly. The crowd murmured. The scholar had landed a blow. Jacques' expression darkened. He stopped playing, stopped toying with his opponent. His next punch caught Etienne in the ribs, and something cracked. Etienne cried out, stumbling backward. Another punch to the face broke his nose. Blood poured down his chin, soaking his chest. He fell again, and this time he wasn't sure he could get up. His ribs screamed with every breath. His face was a mass of pain. Through the blood and swelling, he could barely see. But he could see Marie-Claire. She had come to watch, despite Sister Marie-Thérèse's protests. She stood at the edge of the crowd, her hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. He had promised to come back to her. Etienne pushed himself to his feet. His legs shook. His vision swam. But he raised his fists again. "Stubborn fool," Jacques muttered. "Fine. I'll finish this." He moved in for the kill, his fist drawn back for a knockout blow. But in his confidence, he dropped his guard slightly. And Etienne, drawing on reserves he didn't know he had, saw the opening. He ducked under Jacques' punch and drove his fist upward with all his remaining strength, catching the big man under the chin. It wasn't a powerful blow, Etienne didn't have the strength for that, but it was perfectly placed. Jacques' head snapped back, his teeth clicking together. He staggered, surprised. Etienne followed up with another punch, and another, ignoring the pain in his broken ribs, ignoring the blood in his eyes. He wasn't trying to win anymore. He was just trying to survive, to stay on his feet, to prove that he wouldn't quit. Jacques recovered quickly and unleashed a barrage of punches that drove Etienne backward. A blow to the temple sent him crashing to the ground. He tried to rise, but his body wouldn't obey. His arms gave out. He collapsed face first in the dirt. "Stay down," Jacques said, standing over him. "It's over." But Etienne pushed himself up on his hands and knees. Blood dripped from his face, forming a pool in the dirt. His broken ribs grated with every breath. But he wasn't finished. Not yet. "I said stay down!" Jacques kicked him in the ribs, and Etienne screamed. He rolled onto his back, gasping, unable to move. "That's enough," Bienville's voice cut through the crowd. "The duel is over. Moreau wins." Jacques raised his arms in victory, grinning at the crowd. Then he looked down at Etienne, still lying in the dirt. "Remember this, scholar. Remember what happens when you challenge your betters. And stay away from Marie-Claire. She's mine now." He walked away, accepting congratulations from his friends. The crowd began to disperse. The entertainment over. Dr. Alexandra knelt beside Etienne. "Don't try to move. You have broken ribs, possibly a concussion. Your nose is broken. You're lucky he didn't kill you. I need to see her," Etienne gasped. "You need to lie still while I tend to your injuries." But Marie-Claire was already there, pushing past the doctor, falling to her knees beside Etienne. Her face was wet with tears, her hands shaking as she touched his face gently. "You fool," she whispered. "You beautiful, brave fool." "I'm sorry," he managed to say. "I couldn't protect you. You tried. That's more than anyone else has ever done for me." She looked up at Dr. Alexandra. "Can we move him?" "Carefully. Very carefully. He needs to be somewhere warm and dry while I set his ribs. Bring him to the barracks. Sister Marie-Thérèse will allow it. I'll tend to him." "Mademoiselle, that's not proper." "I don't care about proper." Marie-Claire's voice was fierce. "He fought for me. He nearly died for me. The least I can do is care for him while he heals. Now help me get him up." Together, they lifted Etienne and half-carried, half-dragged him to the women's barracks. Sister Marie-Thérèse took one look at his battered face and nodded grimly. "Put him in the back room. I'll fetch water and bandages." They laid him on a pallet, and Dr. Alexandra began his work. He cleaned the wounds, set the broken nose, and wrapped the broken ribs tightly. Etienne drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of pain, gentle hands, and Marie-Claire's voice murmuring reassurances. When the doctor was finished, he stood and looked at Marie-Claire. "He'll live, but he needs rest. Weeks of it. Those ribs need time to heal, and he's lucky Moreau didn't rupture something internal. I'll take care of him," Marie-Claire said. "I'm sure you will." Dr. Alexandra paused at the door. "For what it's worth, mademoiselle, I've never seen a man fight so hard for something he believed in. He may have lost the duel, but he won something more important." "What's that?" "He proved he was willing to die for you. That's not something Jacques Moreau can claim." After the doctor left, Marie-Claire sat beside Etienne's pallet, holding his hand. His face was swollen and bruised, barely recognizable. But he was alive. He was breathing. And he had fought for her. She thought about what Dr. Alexandra had said. Etienne had lost the duel, but he had won something more important. He had won her heart. She leaned down and kissed his forehead gently. "Rest now," she whispered. "I'll be here when you wake." Part 7. Recovery and Revelation. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Marie-Claire's life. She spent her days in the back room of the barracks, tending to Etienne's injuries. Sister Marie-Thérèse allowed it. Though she insisted on propriety, the door must remain open, and one of the other girls must always be present as a chaperone. At first, Etienne was barely conscious, drifting in and out of fevered dreams. Marie-Claire bathed his face with cool water, spooned broth into his mouth, and changed his bandages. She read to him from the prayer book she had brought from France, though she suspected he couldn't hear her. On the third day, his fever broke. He opened his eyes, or tried to. They were still swollen, nearly shut, and croaked. "Marie Claire? I'm here," she said, taking his hand. "You're safe. You're going to be all right. Did I win?" "No. But you didn't lose either." "Not really." He tried to smile, but his split lip made it painful. "That's a very diplomatic answer. Rest. Don't try to talk." But as the days passed and his strength returned, they talked for hours. Marie Claire learned about his childhood in Rouen, his mother, who had died when he was 12, and his father, who had wanted him to be a merchant. "I disappointed him," Etienne said one afternoon, his voice still rough. "I wanted to read books, to learn about the world. He wanted me to count coins and measure cloth. When I signed on with the expedition, he said I was throwing my life away. He died before I left France. My father. He died thinking I was a disappointment. Then he was a fool." Etienne laughed, then winced as his ribs protested. "Don't make me laugh. It hurts. I'm sorry." But she was smiling. Dr. Alexandre visited daily to check Etienne's progress. The physician was a thin, scholarly man in his 40s who had come to Louisiana seeking adventure and found mostly disease and hardship. He wore a long black coat despite the heat, and his fingers were stained with the herbs and tinctures he prepared. "The ribs are healing well," he announced one morning, probing Etienne's side with practiced fingers. "The swelling in your face is going down. You're young and strong, you'll recover fully, though you'll have some interesting scars." "Will he be able to work?" Marie Claire asked. "In time, but not heavy labor. Not for a while yet." Dr. Alexandre looked at Etienne thoughtfully. "What is your trade, Monsieur Beaumont?" "I was a sailor. Before that, a clerk." "Can you read and write?" "Yes. In French and Latin. Some Spanish." The doctor's eyebrows rose. "Latin? That's unusual for a sailor." "I told you I disappointed my father." Dr. Alexandra smiled. "Well, you may have found your calling here. We desperately need someone who can keep proper records, write letters to France, and maintain the colony's accounts. Bienville has been doing it himself, but he's too busy with other matters. If you're interested, I could speak to him." Etienne's heart leaped. A position as a clerk would mean steady work, a salary, and a future. It would mean he could stay in Mobile, could build a life here, could marry. "I would be very interested," he said. After Dr. Alexandra left, Marie Claire squeezed his hand. "You see? God provides. Or perhaps you do," Etienne said, looking at her. "You've been here every day. You've barely left my side. Where else would I be?" "Considering marriage proposals, I heard Jacques has been asking for you." Her face darkened. "Jacques Moreau can ask all he likes. My answer will always be no. But you need to marry someone. That's why you came here." "I came here because I had no choice," Marie Claire said quietly. "But now that I'm here, I find I do have choices. And I choose to wait for a man who would fight for me, even knowing he would lose. A man who values books and learning. A man who sees me as more than property." Their eyes met, and in that moment, everything changed. The air between them seemed to shimmer with possibility. "Marie Claire," Etienne began, but she placed a finger on his lips. "Don't. Not yet. Not until you're healed. Until you have your position. Until we know what the future holds. But know this, Etienne Beaumont, my heart is already given. It was given the moment you stood up to Jacques, knowing what it would cost you." Etienne took her hand and kissed it, a gesture that made her blush. "Then I will heal as quickly as possible, and I will make myself worthy of such a gift." "You already are," she whispered. But their happiness was shadowed by Jacques Moreau's presence. He had not forgotten his humiliation, nor his claim on Marie Claire. He watched them with cold eyes, and when he passed Etienne in the fort, he would shoulder him roughly, muttering threats. "One day, scholar," he said once, his breath reeking of rum, "you'll be alone, and when that day comes, I'll finish what I started." Etienne said nothing, but he felt the threat like a knife between his ribs. By late September, Etienne was well enough to begin his new duties. Bienville had indeed offered him the position of colonial clerk, with a small salary and a room in the fort. It wasn't much, but it was honest work, and it meant he could stay in Mobile. His first task was to inventory the colony's supplies, which proved depressing. They were desperately short of everything: tools, cloth, gunpowder, medicine. The last supply ship from France had been delayed, and no one knew when the next would arrive. "We're living on borrowed time," Bienville told him one evening, studying the ledgers Etienne had prepared. "If we don't get supplies soon, we'll have to abandon the settlement. Surely France won't let that happen. France is at war with half of Europe. Louisiana is the least of their concerns." Bienville sighed. "But we'll manage. We always do. The Mobilians have been teaching us which plants are edible, how to fish in the bay, and how to hunt in the swamps. We won't starve, but we won't prosper either, not without support from home." As autumn turned to winter, though, winter in Mobile meant only cooler temperatures and less oppressive humidity. Etienne and Marie-Claire's courtship continued under Sister Marie-Thérèse's watchful eye. They walked together in the evenings, always chaperoned, talking about everything and nothing. They attended Mass together on Sundays, sitting side by side in the rough wooden chapel. Marie-Claire had begun teaching the children of the settlement, gathering them in the shade of a great oak tree outside the fort. She had no books except her prayer book and Bible, but she taught them their letters by scratching in the dirt with sticks, taught them numbers by counting beans and shells. Etienne would sometimes watch her, marveling at her patience and skill. She had a gift for teaching, a way of making even the dullest subject enjoyable. The children adored her, and their parents were grateful. "You're building something important," he told her one evening as they walked along the riverbank. "These children, they're the first generation born in Louisiana. What you teach them will shape the colony's future. I only wish I had proper books, proper materials. Perhaps the next supply ship will bring some, but when the next ship finally arrived in November, it brought not books but disaster." The Saint François had left France in July, laden with tools, cloth, gunpowder, and food. But it had encountered a hurricane in the Caribbean, and though it survived, it was severely damaged. The captain limped into Mobile Bay with his ship taking on water, his cargo ruined by seawater and half his crew dead from fever. Bienville ordered everything salvageable brought ashore, but it wasn't much. Most of the food was spoiled, the gunpowder was wet and useless, and the cloth was mildewed. The tools were intact, at least, but there were far fewer than they needed. "This is a catastrophe," Bienville said, surveying the ruined cargo. "We were counting on these supplies to get us through the winter." "What will we do?" Etienne asked. "We'll survive. We'll hunt, we'll fish, we'll trade with the Mobilians. We'll make do with what we have." Bienville's jaw was set. "We didn't come this far to give up now." The winter of 1704 to 1705 was hard. Food was scarce, and the colonists survived on sagamité, a corn porridge the Mobilians had taught them to make, supplemented with whatever fish and game they could catch. Venison was a luxury, bear meat a rare treat. More often, they ate catfish from the river, oysters from the bay, and wild turkey when they could shoot one. Dr. Alexandre did his best to keep everyone healthy, using herbs the Mobilians had shown him. Sassafras root for fever, willow bark for pain, and poultices of crushed leaves for wounds. But his supplies of European medicines were nearly exhausted, and he worried constantly about what would happen when they ran out entirely. "We're becoming more Indian than French," he remarked to Etienne one day. "We eat their food, use their medicines, wear their deerskins because our French cloth is rotting in this climate." It was true. The colonists' clothing had begun to adapt to the harsh conditions. The men had largely abandoned their heavy woolen coats and breeches for lighter linen shirts and deerskin leggings. The women still wore their petticoats and bodices, but the fabrics were lighter now, and many had adopted the Mobilian practice of going barefoot in the summer heat. Marie Claire still wore her white linen cap, as all respectable French women did, but she had shortened her skirts to keep them out of the mud, and she had learned to tie her petticoats up when she worked. Her bodice was laced loosely in the heat, and she had rolled her sleeves to her elbows. Sister Marie-Thérèse clucked disapprovingly, but even she had made concessions to the climate. The men wore their hair long now, tied back with leather thongs, and most had grown beards. Etienne's beard came in dark and full, making him look older, more rugged. Marie Claire liked it, though she teased him about looking like a coureur de bois. "Better a woodsman than a scholar?" he asked, smiling. "Better a man who can be both," she replied. As winter gave way to spring, the settlement began to recover. The Mobilians brought them seed corn, and the colonists planted their first crops in the rich bottomland near the fort. They built fish weirs in the river, learning the techniques from their Indian neighbors. They hunted in the forests, bringing back deer, turkey, and the occasional bear, and they began to plan for the future. Etienne had saved enough from his salary to begin building a house. It would be small, just 2 rooms, but it would be his own. He chose a spot on higher ground, away from the river's flood zone, and began cutting logs with the help of some of the other men. Jacques Moreau watched this with barely concealed rage. He had built his own house, larger and more impressive than Etienne's would be, but Marie Claire had still refused him. She had refused every man who asked for her, waiting for Etienne to finish his house and make his proposal official. "She's making a fool of you," Jacques told her one day, cornering her outside the chapel. "He's a clerk, a nothing. I could give you a real life, a real home." "I don't want what you're offering," Marie Claire said coldly. "You think you're too good for me? You, an orphan from a convent? I think I deserve better than a man who sees women as property." Jacques' face darkened. "You'll regret this, both of you." He stalked away, and Marie Claire felt a chill despite the warm spring air. She told Etienne about the encounter that evening, and he held her close. "I won't let him hurt you," he promised. "I'm not afraid of him. Not anymore." But perhaps she should have been. Part 8. The Storm and the Sinking. Spring in Mobile brought not just warmth, but violence. The storms that rolled in from the Gulf were unlike anything the French colonists had experienced. Thunder that shook the ground, lightning that split trees, rain that fell in solid sheets. In April 1705, a storm came that would be remembered for years. It began as a distant rumble, a darkening of the southern sky. The Mobilians saw it coming and warned the French to secure everything, to bring the animals inside the fort, to prepare for what they called the Great Wind. Bienville ordered everyone to take shelter. The colonists crowded into the fort's buildings, watching through the windows as the storm approached. The wind rose, bending the trees nearly double. The rain came in horizontal sheets, so thick they couldn't see more than a few feet, and then the real wind hit. Etienne had never heard anything like it, a roar like 1,000 demons, a shriek that seemed to come from the earth itself. The fort's buildings shuddered and groaned. Shingles tore away from roofs, spinning into the maelstrom. Trees snapped like twigs. Marie Claire huddled against him, her face pale. Around them, the other colonists prayed, their voices barely audible over the storm's fury. The hurricane, for that, was what the Spanish called such storms lasted for hours. When it finally passed, the colonists emerged to find their settlement devastated. Roofs were gone, walls had collapsed, and trees lay everywhere like fallen soldiers. The chapel's roof was completely gone, the altar exposed to the sky, and Etienne's half-built house was nothing but scattered logs. He stood looking at the wreckage, feeling his dreams crumble. It had taken him months to cut those logs, to prepare that site. Now it was all gone. Marie Claire took his hand. "We'll rebuild," she said. "Together. I have nothing to offer you now. You have yourself. That's all I've ever wanted." But the storm had brought worse news. A ship had been spotted in the bay during the hurricane, trying to make for the safety of the harbor. No one knew if it had survived. The next morning, Bienville sent men to search the shoreline. They found wreckage scattered for miles, broken timbers, torn sails, barrels, and crates washed up on the beach. And bodies, sailors who had drowned when their ship broke apart in the storm. It was the supply ship they had been expecting from France. The ship that was supposed to bring them tools, food, medicine, and everything they needed to survive another year. Now it was gone, along with all its cargo and most of its crew. The loss was devastating. Without those supplies, the colony's future was in serious doubt. Bienville called a meeting of all the colonists to discuss their options. "We can abandon the settlement and return to France," he said. "Or we can stay and make do with what we have. But I won't lie to you if we stay. It will be hard. Very hard. We'll have to rely on the Mobilians for food, on our own ingenuity for tools. We'll have to become more Indian than French." "I say we stay," said Pierre Lebrun, the carpenter. "We've come too far to give up now." Others agreed. They had invested too much their time, their labor, their dreams to abandon Louisiana now. They would stay, they would survive, they would build something lasting. Etienne looked at Marie-Claire, and she nodded. They would stay too. But staying meant adapting. The colonists began to rely more heavily on the Mobilians, trading French goods, knives, needles, cloth for food and knowledge. The Indians taught them how to make fish traps from woven cane, how to preserve meat by smoking it, and how to find edible roots and berries in the forest. Chief Tohome, leader of the Mobilians who lived near the fort, became a frequent visitor. He was an older man, dignified and wise, who spoke some French and seemed genuinely interested in maintaining peace with the colonists. His people had suffered from raids by the Alabama Indians to the north, and he saw the French as potential allies. "Your guns are powerful," he told Bienville through an interpreter. "Together, we can protect each other." It was an alliance born of necessity, but it worked. The Mobilians warned the French of approaching Alabama war parties, and the French provided guns and ammunition for defense. Gradually, a mutual respect developed. Marie-Claire became friends with some of the Mobilian women, who taught her their methods of preparing food and medicine. She learned to make hominy from corn, to weave baskets from river cane, to identify the plants that could heal and those that could kill. "You're becoming quite the frontier woman," Etienne teased her one evening. "I'm becoming whatever I need to be to survive here," she replied. "We all are." It was true. The distinction between French and Indian was blurring. The colonists wore deerskin and moccasins, ate sagamite and smoked fish, used Indian medicines and Indian tools. They were creating something new, not quite French, not quite Indian, but something uniquely Louisianan. Through it all, Etienne worked to rebuild his house. It went slowly without proper tools, but he persisted. Other men helped when they could, and gradually the structure took shape. It was smaller than he had planned, cruder, but it was solid. It would keep out the rain and the heat. By midsummer, it was finished. Just 2 rooms, a main room with a fireplace and a smaller bedroom, but it was home. Etienne stood in the doorway, looking at what he had built with his own hands, and felt a surge of pride. "It's beautiful," Marie-Claire said, standing beside him. "It's rough. It's ours." He turned to her. "Marie-Claire Dubois, will you marry me?" She smiled, tears in her eyes. "I thought you'd never ask. I wanted to have something to offer you first. You've always had something to offer me. Your heart, your courage, your love. That's all I've ever needed." They were married in August 1705, in the roofless chapel under the open sky. Father Henri performed the ceremony, his voice strong and clear. Marie-Claire wore a dress of white linen that the other Pelican girls had helped her sew, and a crown of wildflowers in her hair. Etienne wore his best shirt and breeches, cleaned and mended, his beard neatly trimmed. The entire settlement attended. Even Jacques Moreau was there, standing at the back, his face dark with anger. When Father Henri pronounced them man and wife, Etienne kissed Marie-Claire, and the colonists cheered. It was a moment of joy in a challenging year, a reminder that life continued even in the wilderness. The celebration afterward was modest. There was little food left, but heartfelt. The colonists danced to fiddle music, sang songs from home, and toasted the newlyweds with watered wine. The Mobilians came too, bringing gifts of food and offering their own blessings. As the sun set, Etienne and Marie-Claire walked to their new home, hand in hand. It wasn't much a rough cabin in a wilderness fort, but it was theirs. They had found each other against all odds, had fought for their love, and had built something real and lasting. "Welcome home, Madame Beaumont," Etienne said, lifting her over the threshold. Marie-Claire laughed, her eyes shining. "I like the sound of that." That night, in their small house, they began their life together. Outside, the wilderness pressed close, full of dangers and uncertainties, but inside, they had each other, and that was enough. Part 9. Building a Life. The first year of their marriage was hard but happy. Etienne continued his work as a colonial clerk, keeping the settlement's records, writing letters to France, managing the meager supplies. Marie-Claire continued teaching the children, now with a few more students as new families arrived and babies were born. They fell into a rhythm, a pattern of daily life that was both strange and comforting. Etienne would rise at dawn, tend their small garden, then walk to the fort for his duties. Marie-Claire would prepare their breakfast, usually sagamité with whatever fish or meat they had, then gather her students under the oak tree. In the evenings, they would sit together by their fire, talking about their day, making plans for the future. Sometimes, Etienne would read to her from the few books he had brought from France, Virgil's Aeneid, a volume of French poetry, a battered copy of Montaigne's essays. Marie-Claire would sew or mend, her needle flashing in the firelight. "Do you ever regret it?" Etienne asked her one night. "Coming here, marrying me, giving up the life you might have had in France?" "What life?" Marie-Claire replied. "I was an orphan in a convent. I had no prospects, no future. Here, I have a home, a husband I love, and work that matters. Why would I regret that? Because it's so hard, because we have so little. We have each other. That's not little." He kissed her then, grateful beyond words for this woman who had chosen him, who had seen past his poverty and his scars to the man beneath. But their happiness was shadowed by Jacques Moreau's continued presence. He had not forgiven them, had not forgotten. He watched them with cold eyes, and when he drank, which was often, he would mutter threats that everyone pretended not to hear. "One day," he told Pierre Lebrun, loud enough for others to hear, "that scholar is going to have an accident, and his pretty wife will need a real man to take care of her." Lebrun reported this to Etienne, who felt a chill of fear. But what could he do? Jacques hadn't actually done anything, hadn't broken any laws. He was just a bitter man nursing his grievances. "Be careful," Lebrun warned. "Don't go anywhere alone. Jacques is dangerous when he's drunk, and he's drunk most of the time now." Etienne promised to be careful, but he couldn't live his life in fear. He had work to do, a wife to support, a future to build. In the spring of 1706, Marie-Claire discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror. Joy because they wanted children, because a child would be the ultimate expression of their love. Terror because childbirth was dangerous, especially in the wilderness, and so many women died bringing new life into the world. Dr. Alexandre examined her and pronounced her healthy. "You're young and strong," he said. "You should do fine, but I won't lie to you, there are risks. There are always risks." "I'm not afraid," Marie-Claire said, though her hand trembled slightly in Etienne's. "Good. Fear doesn't help. Just take care of yourself, eat well, rest when you need to, and when your time comes, send for me immediately." As her pregnancy progressed, Marie-Claire continued teaching, though she tired more easily now. The other women of the settlement, the Pelican girls who had become her sisters, rallied around her, offering advice and support. They had all seen childbirth, had all lost friends to it, and they knew the dangers. "You'll be fine," Jeanne Burrell told her. Jeanne had married Pierre Lebrun and was pregnant herself. "We'll help each other through this." The Mobilian women also offered their knowledge. They brought herbs to ease morning sickness, showed Marie Claire exercises to prepare her body for birth, and taught her songs to sing during labor. Their methods differed from French methods, but they had been bringing babies into the world for generations, and their knowledge was valuable. As summer turned to fall, Marie Claire's belly swelled. She could no longer hide her condition, and she had to stop teaching because the work had become too tiring. She spent her days at home, sewing tiny clothes, preparing for the baby's arrival. Etienne was terrified. He had seen too many women die in childbirth, had heard too many stories of babies born dead or dying within days. He tried to hide his fear from Marie Claire, but she knew. "I'll be fine," she told him one night, taking his hand and placing it on her belly. "Feel that? The baby is strong. We'll both be fine." He felt the flutter of movement under his palm and was filled with wonder. His child, their child, a new life they had created together. "I love you," he whispered. "I know, and I love you. Whatever happens, remember that." Her labor began on a cold November night. Etienne woke to find her gripping his arm, her face tight with pain. "It's time," she said. He ran to fetch Dr. Alexandre and the midwife, a Mobilian woman named Singing Bird who had delivered dozens of babies. They came quickly, bringing their supplies, clean cloths, herbs, hot water. "You need to leave," Dr. Alexandre told Etienne. "This is women's work." "I'm not leaving her. You'll only be in the way. I don't care. I'm staying." Marie Claire, between contractions, managed a weak smile. "Let him stay. I want him here." So Etienne stayed, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool water, murmuring encouragement as the hours passed. The labor was long and hard. Marie Claire screamed, wept, cursed him for doing this to her. He took it all, never leaving her side. Dawn was breaking when the baby finally came a girl, small but perfect, with a lusty cry that filled the room. Dr. Alexandra cut the cord, and Singing Bird cleaned the baby and wrapped her in a soft cloth. "A daughter," the doctor said, placing the baby in Marie Claire's arms. "Congratulations." Marie Claire looked down at the tiny face, the dark eyes that seemed to see everything, and burst into tears. "She's beautiful. She's perfect," Etienne agreed, his own eyes wet. "What should we name her?" "Marguerite," Marie Claire said. "After my mother." Little Marguerite Beaumont was the first child born to a Pelican girl in Mobile, but she wouldn't be the last. Over the next few years, more babies arrived. Jean Lebrun had a son, then another daughter. Other Pelican girls married and had children. The settlement's population grew, not from new arrivals from France, but from births. These children were different from their parents. They were born in Louisiana and knew no other home. They grew up speaking French and learning Mobilian words, eating sagamité and venison, and playing in the forests and swamps. They were the first true Louisianans, neither entirely French nor fully Indian, but something new. Marie Claire resumed teaching when Marguerite was old enough, bringing her daughter to the lessons. The children loved having a baby in the family, and Marguerite grew up surrounded by learning and laughter. But the settlement's troubles were far from over. Part X. Floods and Enemies. The location of Fort Louis at 27 Mile Bluff had always been problematic. The site was prone to flooding, and every spring the river would rise, sometimes inundating the lower parts of the settlement. The colonists built levees and drainage ditches, but it was never enough. In the spring of 1707, the worst flood yet struck. The river rose 15 feet above its normal level, pouring into the fort, flooding homes and storehouses. The colonists fled to higher ground, watching helplessly as their possessions floated away. When the water finally receded, the damage was catastrophic. Homes were destroyed, food stores were ruined, and the fort's walls were undermined. It took months to rebuild, and even then, everyone knew it was only a matter of time before it happened again. "We need to move," Bienville said at a council meeting. "This location is untenable. We need higher ground, closer to the bay." But moving an entire settlement was a massive undertaking, and there were other, more immediate threats to deal with. The Alabama Indians to the north had become increasingly hostile. They resented the French presence and saw the colonists as invaders on their land. They had been raiding Mobilian villages, and there were rumors they were planning an attack on Fort Louis itself. The rumors proved true in the summer of 1708. The attack came at dawn. Without warning, Etienne was awakened by gunfire and screaming. He grabbed his musket all colonists were required to keep weapons ready and ran outside. The fort was under attack. Alabama warriors had breached the walls, were fighting hand to hand with the French soldiers. Smoke rose from burning buildings. Women and children were screaming, running for shelter. "Get to the blockhouse!" Bienville was shouting. "Everyone to the blockhouse!" Etienne ran back to his house. Marie-Claire was already up, clutching Marguerite, her face white with terror. "Come on!" He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the blockhouse, the fort's strongest building. They ran through chaos. All around them, men were fighting, dying. An Alabama warrior lunged at them, tomahawk raised. Etienne fired his musket, and the warrior fell. He didn't stop to see if the man was dead, just kept running, pulling Marie-Claire along. They made it to the blockhouse, crowding inside with dozens of other colonists. The heavy door slammed shut, and they could hear the battle raging outside. It lasted for hours. The Alabama warriors tried to break into the blockhouse but couldn't breach its thick walls. Eventually, the French soldiers drove them off, but the damage was done. When it was finally safe to emerge, the colonists found their settlement in ruins. Buildings were burned, the walls were breached, and 17 colonists were dead, including 3 women and 2 children. Jacques Moreau was among the dead. He had been drunk when the attack came, too slow to defend himself. An Alabama warrior had split his skull with a tomahawk. They found his body in the ruins of his house, still clutching an empty rum bottle. Etienne felt no satisfaction at his enemy's death, only a weary sadness. Jacques had been a bitter, violent man, but he hadn't deserved to die like that. "God rest his soul," Marie-Claire said, making the sign of the cross. The attack convinced Bienville that they had to move. The current location was indefensible, too far from the bay, too vulnerable to flooding and attack. He had already scouted a new site, a bluff, at the mouth of the Mobile River, where it emptied into the bay. The ground there was higher, less prone to flooding, and the location would be easier to defend. "We'll start moving in the spring," he announced. "Everyone needs to prepare. We'll take everything we can carry, everything we can float down the river. The new Mobile will be better than the old." The winters of 1708 through 1709 were spent preparing for the move. The colonists dismantled buildings, salvaging every nail, every board, every piece of hardware. They built rafts and boats to carry their possessions downriver. They said goodbye to the Mobilian villages near the old fort, though Chief Tahome promised that his people would follow the French to the new location. "We are allies now," he said. "Where you go, we go." The move began in March 1709 and took months to complete. It was an enormous undertaking, moving an entire settlement, with all its people and possessions, 27 miles downriver. They made trip after trip, ferrying loads of supplies, livestock, and building materials. Etienne and Marie-Claire made the journey with Marguerite. Now 2 years old, strapped to Marie-Claire's back in a cradleboard the Mobilian women had made. They took everything they owned, their few pieces of furniture, their clothes, Etienne's precious books, Marie-Claire's teaching materials. The new site was indeed better. The ground was higher, The air was fresher with the bay breeze, and the location was more defensible. They built a new fort, stronger than the old one, with proper walls and bastions. They built new houses, learning from their mistakes and making them sturdier and better suited to the climate. Etienne and Marie Claire's new house was larger than their first, with 3 rooms, now a main room, a bedroom, and a small room for Marguerite. It had real windows with shutters, a proper fireplace, and a porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set over the bay. "It's beautiful," Marie Claire said, standing in their new home. "It's lovely. It's home," Etienne agreed. The new mobile, the settlement that would eventually become the city, began to take shape. Streets were laid out, buildings were erected, and gardens were planted. The Mobilians built their own village nearby, maintaining their alliance with the French. Life settled into a new rhythm. Etienne continued his work as a clerk, now with more responsibilities as the settlement grew. Marie Claire resumed teaching, now with a proper schoolhouse, a small building near the chapel where she could teach year-round. More children were born. Marguerite had a baby brother in 1710, a boy they named Jean-Baptiste after Bienville. Then, another daughter was born in 1712, whom they named Catherine. The Beaumont family was growing, as was the settlement. But challenges remained. Supply ships from France were still irregular, and the colonists had to be largely self-sufficient. They grew corn and vegetables, raised chickens and pigs, hunted and fished. They traded with the Mobilians for deerskins and bear oil, with Spanish traders from Pensacola for tools and cloth. Dr. Alexandre continued his work, now with a proper surgery in the new fort. He had become an expert in treating tropical diseases, using a combination of European and Indian medicines. He taught Marie Claire and the other women how to prepare remedies, sassafras tea for fever, willow bark tea for pain, and poultices of crushed herbs for wounds. "We're creating a new kind of medicine here," he told her one day, "taking the best of both worlds, European knowledge and Indian wisdom. Perhaps that's what Louisiana will be, the best of both worlds." The colonists' clothing continued to evolve. The women still wore their caps and petticoats, but the fabrics were lighter, often linen rather than wool. They had adopted the practice of wearing loose, short-sleeved shifts in the summer heat, with their bodices laced loosely for comfort. Their skirts were shorter, and their shoes were often moccasins rather than the wooden sabots they had brought from France. The men wore linen shirts and breeches in the summer, deerskin in the winter. They had largely abandoned their tricorn hats for broad-brimmed straw hats, which offered better protection from the sun. Many wore their hair long and tied back, and beards were common. The children wore simple shifts and breeches, often going barefoot in the warm months. They were brown from the sun, firm from outdoor play, fluent in both French and Mobilian. They were growing up wild and free, in a way that would have been impossible in France. Part XI, Fire and Hurricane. In August 1711, disaster struck again, this time in the form of fire. It started in the bakery, a spark from the oven catching on the thatched roof. In the summer heat, with everything tinder dry, the fire spread quickly. Within minutes, half the settlement was ablaze. "Fire! Fire!" the cry went up, and everyone rushed to help. They formed bucket brigades to pass water from the river. But it wasn't enough. The fire was too hot, too fast. Building after building caught fire and burned. Etienne and Marie Claire worked frantically to save their house, throwing water on the roof, beating out sparks with wet blankets. Around them, other families were doing the same, fighting desperately to save their homes. The schoolhouse caught fire. Marie Claire watched in horror as the building she had worked so hard to establish went up in flames, taking with it all her teaching materials, the few books she had accumulated, and the slates and chalk she had treasured. "No," she cried, starting toward it, but Etienne held her back. "It's too late. Let it go." She wept in his arms as the schoolhouse burned, as years of work turned to ash. By the time the fire was finally brought under control, A third of the settlement was destroyed. Miraculously, no one had died, but many families had lost everything. The colonists began rebuilding immediately. They had no choice, winter was coming, and they needed shelter. This time, they built with more care, using less thatch and more shingles, creating fire breaks between buildings, and establishing rules about where fires could be lit. Marie Claire's schoolhouse was rebuilt, larger than before, with proper desks and benches. The colonists contributed what they could, a few books, some slates, precious paper, and ink. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "We'll build it back better," Etienne promised her. "Everything we lost, we'll replace." "I know, but it's hard starting over again. We've done it before. We'll do it again." And they did. By the end of 1711, the settlement was largely rebuilt, stronger and more organized than before. But nature wasn't finished with them yet. The hurricane that struck in September 1712 was worse than the one in 1705. It came roaring out of the Gulf, with winds strong enough to tear the world apart. The colonists huddled in the fort's strongest buildings, praying, as the storm raged for an entire day and night. When it finally passed, they emerged to find devastation. Trees were down everywhere, buildings were destroyed, and the bay was littered with wreckage. Several ships that had been anchored in the harbor were driven ashore or sunk. But the new fort had held. The stronger construction and better location had saved them. They had lost buildings, but they hadn't lost the settlement. "We're learning," Bienville said, surveying the damage. "Each disaster teaches us something. We're becoming better at surviving here." It was true. With each challenge, the colonists adapted, learned, and grew stronger. They were no longer the naive French settlers who had arrived a decade earlier. They were Louisianans now, hardened by experience, shaped by the land. Part 12. The Changing World. The years passed, and the world changed around them. In 1712, Antoine Crozat took over the administration of Louisiana, promising to make the colony profitable. He sent more settlers, more supplies, more support. The settlement grew, prospered, and became more established. In 1718, New Orleans was founded downriver, and in 1722, it became the new capital of Louisiana. Mobile was no longer the center of French power in the region, but it remained an important port and trading center. Etienne and Marie Claire watched these changes with mixed feelings. They had been part of Mobile's founding, had helped build it from nothing. Now it was being overshadowed by the new city downriver. "Does it bother you?" Marie Claire asked one evening. "That we're no longer the capital?" "No," Etienne said. "We built something here, something lasting. That's what matters. Not whether we're the capital, but that we survived, that we created a home." Their family continued to grow. After Catherine, another son, Pierre, was born in 1714, and another daughter, Anne, in 1716. The Beaumont house was full of children, full of noise, laughter, and life. Marguerite, now 10, helped her mother teach the younger children. She was bright and curious, with her mother's gift for teaching and her father's love of learning. Jean-Baptiste, at 6, was already learning to read and write. The younger children were still babies, but they would learn too. "We're raising scholars," Etienne said proudly, watching his children at their lessons. "We're raising Louisianans," Marie Claire corrected. "Children who can read and write? Yes, but also children who can hunt and fish, who can speak Mobilian, who know how to survive in this land." It was true. Their children were different from French children, different even from their parents. They were something new American, though that word didn't exist yet. They belonged to this land in a way their parents never quite would. The Mardi Gras celebrations continued and grew more elaborate each year. What had started as a simple feast had evolved into a tradition, with parades, costumes, and music. In 1711, the Boeuf Gras Society had paraded through the streets with a giant papier-mâché bull's head, and the tradition had continued. Etienne and Marie-Claire participated every year, dressing in costumes, joining the parades, and celebrating with their neighbors. It was a time of joy, a reminder that even in the wilderness, they could maintain their culture, their traditions. "Do you remember our first Mardi Gras?" Etienne asked Marie-Claire, one fat Tuesday, as they watched the parade pass by. "When we were still courting, still uncertain of our future?" "I remember everything about those days," Marie-Claire said, squeezing his hand. "The fear, the hope, the love. We've come so far since then." "We have, and we'll go farther still, but the world was changing in ways they couldn't control. Part 13 new masters. Suddenly, everything changed. France lost the 7 Years' War, and as part of the peace settlement, Louisiana east of the Mississippi, including Mobile, was ceded to Britain. The news hit the colonists hard. They were French, had always been French. The thought of becoming British subjects was almost unbearable. "What will we do?" Marie-Claire asked. She was 55 now, her hair gray, her face lined by years of sun and hardship. But her eyes were still bright, still fierce. "We'll adapt," Etienne said. He was 58, his beard white, his body bent by years of labor. "We've adapted to everything else. We'll adapt to this." The British arrived in October 1763, and the French flag came down over Fort Condé, which the British renamed. Many French colonists left, moving west to New Orleans or across the river to Spanish territory. But the Beaumonts stayed. This was their home. They had built it, had raised their children here. They weren't leaving. The British proved to be reasonable masters. They allowed the French to keep their language, their religion, and their customs. Life continued much as it had before, just under a different flag. But the Beaumont children were grown now, with families of their own. Marguerite had married a French trader and had 4 children. Jean-Baptiste had become a carpenter, following in Pierre Lebrun's footsteps. Catherine had married a British officer, a scandal that shocked the French community but proved to be a happy match. Pierre and Anne were still young, still finding their way. Etienne and Marie-Claire were grandparents now, their house often full of grandchildren. They had lived to see their family grow and to see Mobile transform from a struggling settlement into an established town. "We did it," Marie-Claire said one evening, sitting on their porch, watching the sun set over the bay. "We survived. We built something lasting." "We did," Etienne agreed. "Against all odds, we did." The years under British rule were relatively peaceful. Mobile grew slowly but steadily, its population increasing, its economy strengthening. The port became busier, with ships arriving from Britain, the Caribbean, and other colonies. Then came the American Revolution. The war that began in 1775 seemed distant at first, a conflict in the northern colonies that had little to do with Mobile, but as the war progressed, it came closer. In 1779, Spain entered the war on the American side, and Spanish forces from New Orleans attacked British positions along the Gulf Coast. In 1780, Spanish forces under Bernardo de Galvez besieged Mobile. The British garrison held out for 2 weeks before surrendering, and Mobile changed hands once again. Etienne and Marie-Claire, now in their 70s, watched yet another flag rise over the fort. They had lived under French rule, British rule, and now Spanish rule. They had seen empires rise and fall, had seen their settlement survive through it all. "How many flags have we seen?" Marie-Claire asked. 3, Etienne said. "French, British, Spanish. Who knows? Perhaps there will be more. I hope not. I'm tired of changing flags." But the Spanish proved to be the most tolerant masters yet. They allowed the French to maintain their language and customs, allowed the British to stay if they wished, and encouraged trade and growth. Mobile prospered under Spanish rule, becoming a true melting pot of cultures: French, British, Spanish, African, and Indian. The Beaumont family continued to grow. Grandchildren became parents themselves, and Etienne and Marie-Claire became great-grandparents. Their family tree spread through Mobile like roots, connecting them to dozens of other families. Dr. Alexandra had died in 1770, but his legacy lived on. His son, trained in his father's methods, continued his work, combining European and Indian medicine to treat the people of Mobile. Father Henri had died in 1765, but the church he had served continued, now with a Spanish priest who said Mass in Latin but spoke French, Spanish, and English. The Mobilians were still there, too, though their numbers had dwindled. Disease and war had taken their toll. But Chief Tohome's descendants maintained the alliance with the colonists, the friendship that had begun in those early, desperate years. Part TV, The Final Years. By 1790, Etienne and Marie-Claire were both in their 80s, ancient by the standards of the time. They had outlived most of their generation, had seen their children grow old, had held great-great-grandchildren in their arms. They still lived in their house, though it had been expanded and improved over the years. Their children wanted them to move in with one of them, but they refused. "This is our home," Marie-Claire said. "We built it together. We'll stay here together." Etienne's health was failing. His hands shook, his eyesight was poor, and his breathing was labored. But his mind was still sharp, and he still read every day, squinting at the pages of his beloved books. Marie-Claire was stronger, though she moved slowly now, her joints stiff with age. She still taught occasionally, though most of the work had been taken over by younger teachers. But children still came to her for stories, for wisdom, for the connection to the past she represented. One evening in the spring of 1791, they sat on their porch, as they had done for decades, watching the sun set over Mobile Bay. The town had grown so much since those early days. There were now hundreds of houses, proper streets, shops, and taverns, and a real church with a bell tower. "Do you remember when we first came here?" Etienne asked. "When it was just a few rough buildings in the wilderness?" "I remember everything," Marie-Claire said. "I remember being terrified, being homesick, being certain I would die here. And instead, you lived. We lived. We built all this. Not just us. All of us together. The Pelican girls, the soldiers, the Mobilians. We all built this together, but we were part of it. We mattered. Yes, we mattered." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, watching the light fade from the sky. They had been married for 86 years, had loved each other for even longer. They had survived yellow fever and hurricanes, floods and fires, Indian attacks and changing empires. They had raised 5 children and seen dozens of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They had built a life together in the wilderness, had helped create something lasting. "I love you," Etienne said. "I've loved you since the moment I saw you on the Pelican, standing at the rail with the wind in your hair." "I know," Marie-Claire said. "And I've loved you since you stood up to Jacques, knowing you would lose, doing it anyway, because it was right. That's when I knew you were the man I wanted to spend my life with. No regrets?" "None. Not one. This life, this place, this family, it's been everything I could have wanted, even though it was so hard. Especially because it was so hard. Easy things don't matter. Hard things, things you have to fight for, those are the things that matter." Etienne squeezed her hand. "You're a wise woman, Marie-Claire Beaumont. I'm an old woman who's learned a few things." They laughed together, the sound soft and warm in the gathering darkness. Etienne died peacefully in his sleep 3 weeks later, with Marie-Claire holding his hand. He was 84 years old and had lived a long and full life. The entire town turned out for his funeral, honoring the man who had been part of Mobile's founding and had served the settlement faithfully for nearly 90 years. Marie-Claire lived for another 2 years, surrounded by her family, still teaching occasionally, still telling stories of the early days. She died in the spring of 1793, at the age of 86, and was buried beside Etienne in the cemetery overlooking the bay. Their gravestone, carved by their grandson who had become a stonemason, read simply, Etienne Beaumont, 1707 to 1791, Marie-Claire Dubois Beaumont, 1707 to 1793, founders of Mobile. Together in life, together in death, together forever. Epilogue. Legacy. The Beaumont family continued to grow and prosper in Mobile. Their descendants would be part of the city's history through the American period, the Civil War, and beyond. Some would become merchants, others teachers, still others soldiers and sailors. But all would carry with them the legacy of Etienne and Marie-Claire, the courage to face the unknown, the strength to endure hardship, the wisdom to adapt and grow. The school Marie-Claire founded continued, evolving over the centuries but never losing its core mission to educate the children of Mobile, to pass on knowledge and wisdom to the next generation. The Mardi Gras tradition they had helped establish became one of Mobile's defining characteristics, a celebration that would continue for centuries, connecting the present to the past. And the house they built, expanded and modified over the years, still stood in the 21st century, now a museum, a reminder of those early days when a handful of French colonists carved out a settlement in the wilderness. Visitors to the museum would see the rough-hewn beams, the wide plank floors, and the massive fireplace. They would see the small bedroom where 5 children had been born, the porch where 2 old people had sat and watched the sun set over the bay they loved. And if they listened carefully, on quiet evenings when the wind blew in from the Gulf, they might hear echoes of the past, the laughter of children, the sound of French being spoken, the voice of a woman teaching, the voice of a man reading poetry. The story of Etienne and Marie-Claire was the story of Mobile itself, a story of courage and love, of hardship and perseverance, of building something lasting in the face of impossible odds. They had come to the wilderness as strangers and had become the founders of a city. They had loved each other through decades of challenges and had created a family that would shape Mobile's future for generations. They had been part of something larger than themselves, something that would outlast them by centuries. They had helped create not just a city, but a culture, a unique blend of French, Spanish, British, African, and Native American influences that would define the Gulf Coast for centuries to come. And at the heart of it all was their love story, a scholar and an orphan who had found each other in the wilderness, who had fought for their love, who had built a life together against all odds. It was a story worth remembering, a story worth telling, a story that would echo through the centuries, reminding future generations that love and courage can overcome any obstacle, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things, that the choices we make today shape the world of tomorrow. Etienne and Marie-Claire Beaumont had made their choices and lived their lives with courage, love, and determination. And in doing so, they had helped create something that would last forever. A city, a culture, a legacy. Mobile, Alabama, the oldest city in the state, the birthplace of American Mardi Gras, stood as its monument. Every street, every building, every tradition carried echoes of those early days, of the people who had struggled and suffered and ultimately triumphed. And somewhere, in the collective memory of the city, in the stories passed down through generations, in the very soil of the place, Etienne and Marie-Claire lived on forever young, forever in love, forever part of the city they had helped to build. Their story was Mobile's story. And Mobile's story was America's story, a story of immigrants and natives, of different cultures coming together, of building something new from the wilderness. It was a story of hope and hardship, of love and loss, of the indomitable human spirit that refuses to give up, no matter the odds. It was a story that began with a ship called the Pelican, carrying 23 young women to an uncertain future. It was a story that continued through hurricanes and floods, through fires and wars, through the rise and fall of empires. And it was a story that would never truly end, as long as people remembered, as long as the city stood, as long as love and courage still mattered in the world. The Pelican's promise had been fulfilled. The young women who had come to the wilderness seeking husbands had found so much more. They had found home. They had found purpose. They had found themselves, and in the process, they had helped create something that would last for centuries. Marie-Claire Dubois, an orphan from a Paris convent, had become Marie-Claire Beaumont, founder of Mobile, teacher of generations, matriarch of a family that would shape the city's future. She had lived a life of meaning and purpose, had loved deeply and been deeply loved in return. Etienne Beaumont, disappointed son of a Rouen merchant, had become a respected clerk, a devoted husband and father, a pillar of the community. He had found in the wilderness what he could never have found in France, a life of his own choosing, a love worth fighting for, a legacy worth leaving. Together, they had written their names into the history of Mobile, the history of Louisiana, and the history of America itself, not in grand gestures or famous deeds, but in the quiet, steady work of building a life, raising a family, serving their community. That was their legacy. That was their gift to the future. And as the sun set over Mobile Bay, as it had set every evening for centuries, the city they had helped to build continued its life growing, changing, evolving, but never forgetting the courage and love of those who had come before, who had carved a home out of the wilderness, who had refused to give up no matter how hard the struggle. The Pelican's promise had been kept. The wilderness had become a city. The strangers had become a community. The love story of two young people had become the foundation of something lasting and beautiful. And somewhere, in the eternal realm beyond time and space, Etienne and Marie-Claire Beaumont smiled, knowing that their love had mattered, that their lives had made a difference, that their story would be told and retold for as long as Mobile stood, together in life, together in death, together forever. The end of their story was just the beginning of Mobile's story, a story that continues to this day. This story will continue for generations to come, a story built on the foundation of love and courage that Etienne and Marie-Claire laid so many years ago. And that, perhaps, is the greatest legacy of all, not monuments or buildings or wealth, but the simple, profound truth that love endures, that courage matters, that ordinary people can change the world one choice at a time, one day at a time, one life at a time. The Pelican had brought them together. The wilderness had tested them. Love had sustained them. And Mobile, beautiful, resilient, enduring Mobile was their gift to the future, their promise kept, their love made manifest in brick and wood and stone, in streets and houses and churches, in the lives of all who came after. This was their story. This was Mobile's story. This was America's story.